I'm Alana, 27, shivering in my car despite the fever burning through my body. The rain pounds on the roof, matching the throbbing in my head. Just hours ago, my own mother locked her door against me, her words still ringing in my ears. "You're alive, but might as well be dead for all the trouble you cause." How does a mother throw out her deathly ill daughter? More importantly, how did I find the strength to not only survive, but fight back and reclaim my life? If you're watching this from somewhere safe, please hit subscribe and leave a comment telling me where you're from. This story of betrayal and resilience might just give you the courage you need if you're facing your own family battles. Growing up, I never had the warm, nurturing relationship with my mother that other kids seem to have. Diane was always emotionally distant, keeping a careful wall between us, even when I was small. I used to think it was something I'd done wrong, some fundamental flaw in me, that made her hold back her affection. My father balanced things out, though. While he worked long hours as a construction manager, he made our time together count. He'd swing me up on his shoulders, take me fishing on weekends, and always made sure to tell me he loved me before bed. That protective buffer disappeared when I was 12. Dad had a massive heart attack at work. One minute he was supervising a building site, the next he was gone. The shock nearly destroyed me, but somehow it seemed to harden something in my mother rather than soften her. She became more withdrawn, more critical of everything I did. The warmth in our house died with my father. For 3 years, it was just the two of us living in uncomfortable silence. I tried everything to win her approval, keeping my grades up, handling household chores without being asked, even learning to cook, so she wouldn't have to make dinner after work. Nothing seemed to crack the ice. Then Gerald entered our lives. My mother met him at a company function. She worked as an administrative assistant at an insurance firm, and he was a regional director. Their courtship was brief and businesslike. Before I knew what was happening, I had a stepfather and a mother who seemed to have transformed overnight. Around Gerald, my mother became someone I barely recognized. She laughed at his jokes, deferred to his opinions, and prioritized his needs above everything. At first, I was hopeful. Maybe his presence would warm our home again. Maybe some of that affection would spill over to me. I was wrong. Gerald viewed me as an inconvenience from the start, a reminder of my mother's previous life. He was never outright cruel, but his dismissive attitude made it clear I was tolerated, not welcomed. Alana needs new school supplies, would be met with sighs about expenses. Alana got an A on her project, would receive a disinterested, "That's nice," without looking up from his newspaper. By the time I graduated high school, I understood the dynamic perfectly. If I wanted any semblance of peace, I needed to make myself as invisible as possible in my own home. I took extra classes to graduate early, worked part-time jobs to save money, and spent as much time as possible at the public library or friends' houses. College was my escape route. I'd always had a talent for art and design, so I pursued a degree in graphic design at the State University. Even though it was only an hour away, I rarely came home. Holiday visits became shorter each year as the tension grew thicker. My mother's rare calls focused on practical matters, never asking how I was really doing or what my dreams were. After graduation, I built a decent career as a freelance graphic designer. I loved the freedom of working for myself, setting my own hours, and choosing projects that excited me. I rented a small but comfortable apartment in the city and created a life that was entirely my own. For several years, things were good. I maintained minimal contact with my mother and Gerald, usually just cards at Christmas, and the occasional obligatory phone call. Then about 6 months ago, something changed. It started with unusual fatigue. As a freelancer, I was used to pushing through long days to meet deadlines, but suddenly I could barely stay awake through a normal workday. I dismissed it as stress or maybe a vitamin deficiency, but other symptoms followed. A persistent cough that wouldn't go away with over-the-counter medicine, night sweats that left my sheets soaking, weight loss that I couldn't explain. When I finally dragged myself to a doctor, the initial tests were inconclusive. "Could be a viral infection," one doctor said. "Possibly walking pneumonia," suggested another. Each visit came with more tests, more prescriptions, and more bills. The American healthcare system isn't kind to self-employed people. My insurance had a high deductible, and the costs were mounting quickly. Each specialist, each test, each medication chipped away at my savings. As my health deteriorated, so did my ability to work consistently. Projects took longer to complete, and some clients grew impatient and took their business elsewhere. By month 4 of this mysterious illness, I was in serious financial trouble. My emergency fund was nearly depleted. Rent was coming due, and for the first time since college, I faced the humiliating prospect of asking my mother for help. I put it off as long as possible, trying everything else first. I took on smaller, quicker projects that I could manage even while sick. I sold furniture and electronics I didn't absolutely need. I applied for assistance programs only to find I still made too much on paper to qualify, even though my income had dropped dramatically. Finally, with just $247 in my bank account and another doctor's appointment looming, I made the call I'd been dreading. My mother answered on the 4th ring, her voice as cool and detached as ever. "Alana, this is unexpected." I swallowed my pride and explained my situation as briefly as possible. The illness, the mounting bills, the dwindling work. I wasn't asking for money, I hastened to add. Just a temporary place to stay until I could get back on my feet. The silence that followed seemed endless. I could almost see her calculating the inconvenience, weighing it against the social obligation of helping one's child. "I'll need to discuss this with Gerald," she finally said. "Call me back tomorrow." That night was one of the longest of my life. I alternated between coughing fits that left me gasping for air and anxious thoughts about what would happen if she said no. By morning, my fever had spiked again, and I barely had the strength to dial her number. Gerald answered. His voice made it clear this was a burden, but after a moment of muffled consultation with my mother, he grudgingly told me I could stay for a short while. I was to take the small guest room in the basement, he added, since they used the main guest room as Gerald's home office. I didn't care. A basement room was better than no room at all. I packed what I could manage in my weakened state, put the rest in a storage unit I couldn't really afford, and drove the hour to my mother's house with frequent stops when dizziness overtook me. The welcome, if you could call it that, was as cold as the basement room. My mother showed me the space with minimal words, pointed out the small bathroom I could use, and reminded me that Gerald worked from home and needed quiet. Then she left me to settle in, never once asking if I needed help carrying my bags down the steep stairs, or if I wanted something to eat after the drive. That first night set the pattern for what was to come. I could hear them talking and moving around upstairs, but no one checked on me. I dragged myself up to the kitchen to find something to eat, only to encounter Gerald's irritated glance over his laptop, as if I'd interrupted something important. My mother was nowhere to be seen. As days passed, it became clear that my presence was considered an imposition rather than an act of family care. My mother would forget to tell me when meals were ready. The medication I left on the kitchen counter would mysteriously get moved to an inconvenient shelf. When I had a particularly bad coughing fit one night, no one came to check if I was okay. The first major confrontation came 3 weeks into my stay. Gerald was hosting a dinner for potential business partners, and despite my obvious illness, my mother insisted I needed to either join them and make an effort or stay completely out of sight. I was running a fever of 101 degrees and could barely stand, but explaining this only earned me a cold look. "We've accommodated you for weeks," she said. "One evening of proper behavior isn't too much to ask in return." I retreated to my basement room, listening to the murmur of conversation and occasional laughter above. That night, I overheard my mother and Gerald arguing about me. "How much longer is this going to continue?" Gerald demanded. "It's been nearly a month. My patience is wearing thin." "What do you expect me to do?" my mother responded. "She's clearly sick. There are shelters for people who can't support themselves. Or what about those artsy friends of hers? She's an adult, Diane not a child, and I'm tired of having our lives disrupted." Their voices dropped then, but the message was clear. My time was limited regardless of my health. The knowledge sat like a stone in my chest, heavier than the congestion that made each breath a struggle. The week that followed brought a dramatic turn for the worse. My fever, which had been fluctuating between 100 and 102 degrees, suddenly spiked to 104. My breathing became so labored that the simple act of walking to the bathroom left me gasping. The cough that had plagued me for months deepened, producing alarming amounts of thick, discolored phlegm. I knew I needed medical attention, but the thought of more bills paralyzed me. Still, when I woke up one morning, unable to catch my breath, I forced myself to climb the stairs and ask my mother for help. She was in the kitchen with Gerald, both of them dressed for what looked like a day out. Their expressions when they saw me were more annoyed than concerned, even though I must have looked terrible. "Mom," I wheezed, leaning heavily against the doorframe. "I think I need to go to the hospital. Can you drive me? I don't think I can drive myself safely." My mother and Gerald exchanged glances. "We have plans today," Gerald said firmly. "The Hendersons are expecting us for lunch, and then we have the community association meeting." "Can't you call an ambulance?" my mother suggested, not quite meeting my eyes. "I can't afford an ambulance," I said, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. "It would cost thousands of dollars. Please, I just need a ride." "Always about money with you lately," Gerald muttered. "Perhaps if you'd managed your business better." That sparked something in me, a flash of anger cutting through the fog of illness. I didn't choose to get sick. Do you think I want to be here begging for help? Do you think this is where I want to be at 27? My outburst triggered a coughing fit so severe, I had to sink to the floor, my whole body convulsing with the effort to breathe. Neither of them moved to help me. When I could finally speak again, I looked up at my mother, searching for any sign of the maternal concern that should have been automatic. "Mom, please. I'm really scared." What happened next will be forever burned into my memory. My mother's face hardened, and she glanced at Gerald before saying, "You've been really scared for weeks now, Alana. Maybe if you focused more on getting better and less on complaining, you'd be back on your feet by now." "Diane," Gerald cut in, his voice coldly practical. "We've discussed this. It's time." He turned to me. "Alana, we've been more than generous, but this arrangement isn't working. We need our home back." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're kicking me out. Now, when I'm telling you I need emergency medical care." "Don't be so dramatic," my mother said, her voice sharp. "You're not dying. You have a bad cold or flu that you've let drag on because you're not taking proper care of yourself." "A bad cold," I repeated, incredulous. "Mom, I can barely breathe. I've lost 20 pounds. I need help." That's when she said the words I'll never forget, words spoken with such callous dismissal that they seemed to freeze the air between us. "You're alive, but might as well be dead for all the trouble you cause." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Gerald looked slightly uncomfortable at the naked cruelty of her statement, but he recovered quickly, glancing at his watch. "You have 2 hours to pack your things," he said. "We'll be back this evening, and we expect you to be gone." They left me there, still sitting on their kitchen floor, struggling to breathe, and now homeless as well. Somehow I pulled myself up and staggered back to the basement. Packing was a nightmare of dizziness and weakness. I had to stop every few minutes to rest my vision, graying out at the edges. The fever made my thoughts skip and slide, making it hard to remember what I'd packed and what I still needed. By the time I'd loaded my car, rain had started to fall. I sat behind the wheel, shivering violently, despite the heat pouring off my skin. Where could I go? I had no family besides my mother. Most of my friends lived in small apartments with roommates, no space for a sick visitor, and I had barely enough money for a single night in the cheapest motel. I was still sitting there, paralyzed by fever and indecision, when my mother and Gerald returned early from their outing. Gerald knocked sharply on my car window. "You need to move your car," he said when I rolled it down. "We're expecting company later, and they'll need the driveway space." I looked at my mother standing behind him, searching for any sign of regret or concern. There was nothing. Her eyes slid away from mine as if I were a stranger, or worse, something unpleasant she didn't want to acknowledge. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Gerald shrugged. "That's not our problem anymore. You're an adult." With that, they turned and walked back into the house, closing the door firmly behind them. I watched through the rain-streaked windshield as the porch light went out, a final symbolic gesture of rejection. The nearest hospital was about 20 minutes away. I wasn't sure I could make it, but I had no choice. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the only family I had left. Each ragged breath a struggle, each mile a battle against the darkness crowding the edges of my vision. I don't remember much of that drive. Flashes of streetlights blurring through rain, the sound of my own labored breathing seeming unnaturally loud. At one point I had to pull over when a coughing fit became so intense I thought I might pass out. Somehow I made it to the hospital parking lot. I remember thinking I just needed to get inside to find help. I opened the car door and tried to stand. The world tilted violently. The last thing I remember is the cold rain on my face as I collapsed onto the wet pavement, too weak to even call for help. I woke to the rhythmic beeping of machines and the antiseptic smell that can only mean one thing: hospital. For a moment, I couldn't remember how I'd gotten there or why. Then it all came flooding back. My mother's cruel words, the impossible drive, collapsing in the parking lot. "Welcome back," said a gentle voice. A nurse with warm brown eyes and a name tag reading Jasmine was adjusting something on my IV. "You gave everyone quite a scare." My throat felt like I'd swallowed broken glass. "What happened?" I managed to croak. "Security found you unconscious in the parking lot," Jasmine explained. "You were brought into the ER with severe pneumonia, dangerously high fever, and beginning signs of sepsis. You've been here for 3 days now." 3 days. I'd lost 3 entire days. "Has anyone called my mother?" I asked, instantly, hating myself for still hoping, still needing after everything. Jasmine's expression softened with sympathy. "We tried the emergency contact in your phone several times. There was no answer, and the voicemail box is full." Of course. Why had I expected anything different? A tear slid down my cheek before I could stop it. "I'm sorry, honey," Jasmine said, gently wiping it away. "Is there someone else we can call for you?" I shook my head, then immediately regretted it as pain lanced through my skull. "There's no one," I whispered. The truth of those words hit me with full force, and I couldn't hold back the sobs that followed, each one triggering painful coughing. Jasmine helped me sit up, supporting me through the coughing fit and offering water afterward. "Easy now," she soothed. "You're not alone here. We're taking good care of you." Her kindness only made me cry harder. How was it that this stranger showed more concern for me than my own mother had? The next few days passed in a blur of doctors' medications and tests. I was diagnosed with severe bacterial pneumonia that had gone untreated for too long, allowing the infection to spread. The doctor looked grave when he explained how close I'd come to respiratory failure. "If you'd arrived even a few hours later, we might be having a very different conversation," he said. "You need to be on IV antibiotics for at least a week, followed by oral antibiotics and respiratory therapy." All I could think about were the mounting costs. When I tried to ask about financial options, my voice dissolved into another coughing fit. The doctor patted my shoulder awkwardly and promised to have someone from billing come talk to me. On my 4th day in the hospital, I was moved from isolation to a regular room with another patient. Tara was in her early 30s, recovering from complications following surgery. She took one look at my tear-stained face and offered me a tissue from her seemingly endless supply. "Bad day?" she asked. That simple question broke something in me. Before I knew it, I was telling this complete stranger everything. My mother's emotional distance being thrown out while deathly ill, having no one to call, no place to go once I was discharged. "That's beyond messed up," Tara said when I finished. "No offense, but your mom sounds like she deserves a special place in hell for that." Her bluntness startled a laugh out of me, which quickly turned into another coughing spell. When I recovered, Tara was watching me thoughtfully. "My sister works for a tenant rights organization," she said. "What your mom and stepdad did. That's an illegal eviction. Even if you don't have a formal lease, you established residency. They can't just throw you out, especially not when you're seriously ill." I hadn't even considered that aspect. In my mind, it was their house, their rules. But Tara insisted I talk to her sister when she visited later. That afternoon, Tara's family arrived. Her husband, 2 young children, and her sister, who did indeed work for a housing rights nonprofit. While Tara's husband took the kids to the cafeteria for ice cream, her sister Kim sat with me and explained my rights in clear terms. "You have grounds for a civil suit," she concluded. "At minimum, they're liable for your medical bills resulting from the eviction, plus damages for emotional distress and the illegal eviction itself." The thought of confronting my mother legally was terrifying. "I don't know if I can do that," I admitted, "and I definitely can't afford a lawyer right now." "There are legal aid services. Kim assured me, and some attorneys will take cases like this on contingency if they think you have a strong claim. She wrote down some names and numbers for me to contact when I felt stronger. Later that evening, a hospital social worker named Margaret came to see me. She had a kind face creased with laugh lines and the calm efficiency of someone who'd seen it all. "I understand you're facing housing insecurity upon discharge," she said, cutting straight to the point. "Let's talk about your options." For the next hour, Margaret helped me navigate the bewildering array of assistance programs I might qualify for: emergency housing vouchers, medical leave from work, disability benefits, payment plans for hospital bills. Each possibility was a small lifeline in what had felt like an ocean of despair. "You're not the first person to face this kind of situation," Margaret told me gently, "and you won't be the last. The system isn't perfect, but there are resources designed to help people through crises like yours." That night, lying in my hospital bed, listening to Tara's soft snoring from the other side of the curtain, something shifted inside me. The crushing weight of abandonment was still there, but alongside it grew something new, a tiny spark of determination. My mother and Gerald had thrown me away when I was at my most vulnerable. They'd expected me to disappear to become someone else's problem. What if I didn't? What if instead of shrinking away in shame, I stood up and fought back? The thought was both terrifying and strangely exhilarating. I fell asleep turning the possibilities over in my mind, planning my next steps with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. My body was finally responding to the antibiotics. After a week in the hospital, my fever had broken, and I could breathe without feeling like I was drowning. The doctors were pleased with my progress, but I faced a new challenge. I would be discharged soon, and I still had nowhere to go. I tried calling my mother one more time, hoping that perhaps worry over my hospitalization had softened her heart. The call went straight to voicemail. I left a brief message explaining that I had been seriously ill but was recovering and asked her to please call me back. She never did. Instead, I received a text message from an unknown number that turned out to be Gerald. "Your things from the basement have been moved to Safe Store on Maple Street. Paid for 1 month. Unit 247. Code is your birthday. Do not contact us again." Reading those cold words, I felt a curious sense of freedom. They had cut the last ties making the decision for me. There would be no reconciliation, no tearful reunion, no acknowledgement of the cruelty they had shown. And somehow, that clarity was better than false hope. I told Tara about the text when she returned from her physical therapy session. "Well, that settles it," she said firmly. "Those people are garbage humans and you're better off without them. Now we just need to figure out where you're going when they spring you from this place." "The social worker mentioned a women's transitional housing program," I said. "It's not ideal, but it's better than nothing." Tara made a face. "Let me make some calls first. My cousin has an Airbnb property that's between guests right now. Maybe you could stay there for a week or two until you find something more permanent." Before she could reach for her phone, we were interrupted by a nursing assistant bringing in my lunch tray. As she was leaving, she mentioned casually, "Oh, you have a visitor waiting. Should I send her in?" A visitor. My heart leaped with irrational hope that it might be my mother come to apologize and make things right. But the woman who appeared in the doorway was Zoe, my college roommate whom I hadn't seen in nearly 2 years. "Holy crap, Alana," she said, taking in my hospital gown and IV lines. "When I couldn't reach you for that freelance project and your neighbor said you'd been sick, I got worried. But this is next level." Seeing her familiar face, her curly hair now cut short, new glasses perched on her nose, brought tears to my eyes. We'd drifted apart after college, both busy building our careers, but had maintained loose contact through social media and occasional texts. "It's a long story," I said, my voice catching. "I've got time," Zoe replied, pulling up a chair. So I told her everything from the mysterious illness to my mother's betrayal to my current homeless state. Zoe listened without interrupting, her expression darkening as the story unfolded. "Okay, first of all, your mom is dead to me now," she declared when I finished. "Second, this is not even a question. You're staying with me until you get back on your feet." "Zoe, I can't ask you to do that," I protested. "I'm still sick, I don't know when I'll be able to work again, and I have no idea how long it might be." "You didn't ask," I offered, she countered. And it's perfect timing, actually. My roommate just moved out to live with her boyfriend, so I have an empty bedroom. The rent's paid through the end of the month, and after that, we can figure something out based on your situation. I looked at her skeptically. Are you sure I don't want to be a burden? Alana, do you remember sophomore year when I had mono and you literally spoon fed me soup and took notes for all my classes for 3 weeks? I smiled at the memory. You were so delirious you kept calling me Soup Angel. Exactly. Friends help friends. End of discussion. With housing temporarily secured, I could focus on my recovery and next steps. The day before my discharge, Margaret, the social worker, returned with more resources: information about medical bankruptcy contacts for legal aid services, and applications for emergency medical assistance programs. I also wanted to give you this, she said, handing me a business card. Michael is an attorney who specializes in tenant rights and wrongful eviction cases. He does pro bono work for patients in situations like yours. I took the liberty of telling him about your case, and he's interested in talking to you. I turned the card over in my hands, the ember of determination glowing brighter. Thank you, I said. I'll call him. As Margaret turned to leave, she paused in the doorway. Alana, what happened to you was wrong on every level. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. The day I was discharged, Zoe arrived with clean clothes and a fiercely protective attitude that brooked no argument from hospital staff about release instructions. She had already set up her guest room with extra pillows for my still painful coughing fits and stocked her refrigerator with soup and juice. My first week at Zoe's apartment was focused entirely on physical recovery. The simple act of walking from the bedroom to the living room left me exhausted. The antibiotics made me nauseous, and the lingering congestion in my lungs triggered coughing fits that felt like being stabbed repeatedly in the chest. But for the first time in months, I wasn't facing it alone. Zoe worked from home 3 days a week, keeping an eye on me while managing her job as a web developer. On the day she had to go into the office, she texted regularly to check on me. Her boyfriend Daniel stopped by with groceries and stayed for dinner, treating me not as an invalid, but as a friend who happened to be going through a rough patch. As my physical strength slowly returned, I turned my attention to the storage unit where Gerald had moved my belongings. Zoe drove me there, hovering protectively as I entered my birthday into the keypad. The metal door rolled up to reveal stacks of hastily packed boxes, and my furniture piled haphazardly. They really just threw everything in here, didn't they? Zoe said, surveying the chaos. I moved deeper into the unit, taking inventory. My desk was scratched where it had been carelessly dragged. A box labeled kitchen had split open, spilling mugs and plates. I was about to turn away when I noticed something missing. My portfolio case, I said, panic rising, and my external hard drives. They're not here. Those items contained years of work, original designs, client files, templates I'd created and refined. Without them, rebuilding my freelance business would be nearly impossible. Are you sure? Zoe asked, helping me search through the jumbled boxes. Maybe they packed them somewhere else. After an hour of searching, we had to accept the truth. My most valuable professional possessions were missing. Either my mother and Gerald had kept them out of spite, or worse, thrown them away. This changes things, I said quietly, a cold determination replacing the panic. This isn't just about the eviction anymore. They've actively sabotaged my ability to work. The next day, I called Michael, the attorney Margaret had recommended. He agreed to meet with me at Zoe's apartment, given my still limited mobility. Michael turned out to be a soft-spoken man in his 50s with meticulous note-taking habits and a surprising streak of righteous anger when I described what had happened. This is one of the clearest cases of illegal eviction I've seen, he said after hearing the full story. Add in the medical consequences of being evicted while severely ill, plus the apparent theft or destruction of your professional materials, and we have multiple causes of action. He explained the legal options available to me: a formal demand letter, first followed by small claims court if necessary, or potentially a full civil lawsuit given the extent of damages. What exactly would we be asking for? I wanted to know. At minimum, reimbursement for your medical bills resulting from the eviction, the value of any missing or damaged property, temporary housing costs, and damages for the illegal eviction itself, Michael said. Depending on how things proceed, we might also seek emotional distress damages. The thought of confronting my mother through legal channels still made my stomach clench with anxiety. But I thought of her cold eyes as she watched me struggle to breathe, of Gerald's dismissive words of the text message cutting me off as if I were nothing more than an inconvenient bill to be paid and forgotten. "Let's do it," I said. "Where do we start?" Michael helped me create a detailed timeline of events and document everything. Medical records showing how my condition had worsened after the eviction, photos of the hastily packed storage unit, text messages, estimated value of missing items. He drafted a formal demand letter that laid out the facts in stark legal language and specified the compensation we were seeking. "Once they receive this, they have 14 days to respond," he explained. "Based on my experience, they'll probably ignore it or respond with denial and hostility. That's when we file in court." I signed the letter, feeling a strange mix of dread and empowerment. This was happening. I was fighting back. While waiting for the legal process to unfold, I focused on rebuilding what I could of my life. With Zoe's help, I retrieved the most essential items from storage. I applied for emergency medical assistance that would cover part of my hospital bills. I reached out to my most understanding clients, explaining my situation and asking for patience as I slowly resumed work. To my surprise, most responded with compassion. One even offered an advance payment for a project I could work on at my own pace during recovery. Another had a backup of logo files I'd created for them, which helped partially reconstruct my lost portfolio. 2 weeks after sending the demand letter, Michael called. "They've responded," he said, "but not in the way we hoped. They're denying everything and threatening a countersuit for defamation if we proceed." I felt a flash of the old fear, the ingrained response to my mother's disapproval. Then I thought of Jasmine's kindness in the hospital, of Tara and her family rallying around a stranger, of Zoe, opening her home without hesitation, of Margaret and Michael fighting for me when my own family wouldn't. "File the case," I said firmly. "They don't get to rewrite what happened." The weeks leading up to our court date were a strange blend of anxiety and emerging strength. My health continued to improve gradually, though the doctors warned it might be months before my lungs fully recovered. I started working again, part-time, carefully managing my energy to avoid setbacks. Zoe had become more than just a temporary housing solution. She was the friend who held my hair back during coughing fits, who celebrated small victories like climbing a flight of stairs without getting winded, who didn't flinch when I woke screaming from nightmares about being locked out in the rain. "You know you can stay as long as you need, right?" she said one evening as we shared takeout and reality TV. "The apartment's more fun with you here anyway." I smiled gratefully. "I'll pay proper rent starting next month. My client list is growing again." "No rush," she insisted. "Seriously, Alana, you do the same for me." The truth was, I would have. That realization helped quiet the voice in my head, the one that sounded suspiciously like my mother, telling me I was a burden, unwanted, too much trouble. Michael kept me updated on the legal proceedings. My mother and Gerald had hired an attorney who specialized in property disputes. They were building a defense, claiming I had been a problematic guest who refused to leave when asked, that they had given me reasonable notice, and that any health consequences were due to my own neglect of my condition, not their actions. "It's a standard defense strategy," Michael assured me. "Make the victim look like the villain. But we have the medical records, the timestamps on the text messages, and the fact that you were hospitalized within hours of being evicted. The facts are on our side." The morning of our court date arrived with a crystalline autumn chill. I dressed carefully in a borrowed suit from Zoe that we'd altered to fit my still too thin frame. Michael met us at the courthouse, his calm presence steadying my nerves. "Remember," he said quietly as we waited in the hallway, "just tell the truth. Answer questions directly. Don't let them provoke you into an emotional response." I nodded, then froze as I saw them approaching from the other end of the hallway. My mother and Gerald, followed by a sharp-looking woman in an expensive suit who had to be their attorney. My mother's eyes met mine briefly, then slid away. There was no recognition there, no remorse, nothing to indicate I was anything more than an inconvenient legal problem to be solved. The small claims court proceeding was both more formal and more straightforward than I'd expected. The judge, a woman in her 60s with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense manner, listened as Michael presented our case, supported by the medical records, photographs, and timeline we'd prepared. When it was the defense's turn, their attorney painted a very different picture, one where I was an entitled adult child who had taken advantage of my mother's generosity, refused to look for work, and then blamed them when my health problems, which they claimed I had exaggerated, became serious. Furthermore, Your Honor, she concluded smoothly, Ms. Williams voluntarily left the residence. She was never formally evicted. The judge looked skeptical. Are you suggesting that someone with a 104-degree fever and pneumonia so severe she was hospitalized for respiratory distress just decided to leave on her own? We believe she left because she was unwilling to contribute to the household as requested, the attorney replied. Any worsening of her condition afterward is unfortunate, but not the responsibility of my clients. When my mother took the stand, I barely recognized her. She spoke in a trembling voice about her concern for me, claiming she had only asked me to find other arrangements because she wasn't equipped to provide the medical care I needed. We suggested she go to the hospital several times, she said, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. She refused. We were at our wits' end. The lie was so blatant, so completely contrary to what had happened that I gasped audibly. The judge's eyes flicked to me, then back to my mother. Mrs. Harrington, she said, using my mother's married name. The hospital records indicate your daughter was brought in unconscious in critical condition, having collapsed in the parking lot after driving herself there. The admission time was approximately 2 hours after the time you claim you asked her to leave. Are you saying those records are incorrect? My mother faltered. She must have waited before going. We thought she was going to a friend's house. And yet you never checked to see if she arrived safely, despite knowing she was seriously ill. We thought she was exaggerating to get sympathy. Gerald's testimony was even worse. He claimed I had been hostile and uncooperative during my stay, that I had taken advantage of their generosity, and that they had given me plenty of notice to find other arrangements. When it was my turn to testify, I felt surprisingly calm. I simply told the truth about my illness, about asking for help, about being told I was alive, but might as well be dead for all the trouble I caused, about being forced to pack while barely able to stand, about driving myself to the hospital, in a state that doctors later said could have killed me. And at any point during your stay, did you refuse medical attention when it was offered? Michael asked. No, I said clearly. I begged for help getting to a doctor. That's what triggered them throwing me out. I asked my mother to drive me to the hospital because I was too sick to drive safely myself. The judge asked about the missing work materials, and I explained their value and importance to my livelihood. When questioned about whether I had any proof they had been in the basement room, I was able to produce a video call with a client where the distinctive portfolio case was visible in the background, dated just days before the eviction. After both sides had presented their cases, the judge called a brief recess to review the evidence. Waiting in the hallway, I avoided looking toward where my mother and Gerald stood with their attorney heads bent in conversation. How do you think it's going? I whispered to Michael. Quite well, he said. The judge clearly isn't buying their story, especially with the medical records contradicting their timeline so directly. When we were called back in, the judge didn't waste time with preliminaries. Having reviewed the evidence and testimony presented, I find in favor of the plaintiff, she announced. The defendants conducted an illegal eviction under circumstances that demonstrated not just negligence, but deliberate disregard for the plaintiff's well-being. The timing and manner of the eviction directly contributed to the plaintiff's medical emergency and resulting expenses. She awarded me damages covering my hospital bills, compensation for the missing work materials, 2 months of housing costs, and additional damages for the illegal eviction itself. The total came to just over $42,000, far more than I had expected. Furthermore, the judge continued, fixing my mother and Gerald with a stern look, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for review of potential criminal charges related to reckless endangerment. Court is adjourned. In the stunned silence that followed, I felt no triumph, no vindication, just a profound weariness and a strange sort of grief. I had won, but at the cost of confirming what I had long suspected. My mother did not love me, had perhaps never loved me, and no legal judgment could change that fundamental fact. As we gathered our papers, I became aware of a commotion near the door. My mother had broken away from Gerald and her attorney and was approaching me, her face a mask of indignation and something that might have been fear. "Alana," she hissed, grabbing my arm. "How could you do this to us? After everything we did for you?" I looked down at her hand on my arm, then up at her face. Really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. I saw the shallow lines around her mouth, the calculated tremor in her lower lip, the complete absence of actual emotion in her eyes. "You didn't do anything for me," I said quietly, removing her hand. "You never have. That's the whole point. We took you in when you had nowhere to go," she insisted, her voice rising. "And this is how you repay us, by dragging us to court, humiliating us in front of everyone." People were watching now, including the judge who had paused at the door. I felt a curious calm settle over me. "You threw me out in a rainstorm when I had pneumonia," I said, my voice steady. "I nearly died. And you're worried about being humiliated. You've always been dramatic," she snapped, "always wanting special treatment, just like your father." That comparison, intended as an insult, felt like a gift. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "Dad would have driven me to the hospital without hesitation. He would have stayed with me, made sure I was okay. Being like him is the highest compliment you could give me." Gerald appeared at her elbow, trying to pull her away. "Diane, this isn't the place. We'll appeal the decision." I shook my head. "No, you won't, because an appeal means more scrutiny, more evidence, possibly criminal charges. You'll pay the judgment and count yourselves lucky that's all that happens." My mother's face contorted with rage. "This isn't over," she spat. "When you realize what you've done, don't come crawling back." I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had given birth to me but never truly been a mother. "I won't," I promised. "You don't have to worry about that ever again." As they stormed away, Zoe appeared at my side, slipping her arm through mine. "You okay?" she asked softly. "No," I admitted, "but I think I will be." Outside the courthouse, standing in the bright autumn sunlight, I took the deepest breath my healing lungs would allow and felt something shift inside me, the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. The months following the court case brought changes I could never have imagined when I was shivering in my car outside my mother's house, believing myself utterly alone in the world. The judgment money provided immediate financial stability. The first thing I did was open a new bank account completely separate from any that my mother might have known about and deposit the check there. With Michael's help, I filed the necessary paperwork to legally change my last name from my mother's back to my father's original family name. It was a symbolic act, but one that helped me feel like I was reclaiming my identity and honoring the parent who had truly loved me. Finding permanent housing was my next priority. Zoe had been an incredible friend, but I knew I needed my own space to fully heal and rebuild. With part of the settlement money, I was able to pay the security deposit and first few months' rent on a small but sunny one-bedroom apartment not far from Zoe's place. It was nothing fancy, just a simple space with good natural light that welcomed my surviving houseplants and the furniture I'd managed to salvage from storage. The day I moved in, Zoe, Daniel, and a few other friends helped carry boxes and arrange furniture. They surprised me with a housewarming gift, a custom-built desk for my design work crafted by Daniel's brother, who was a carpenter. "To replace the one that got damaged," Zoe explained, watching my face as I ran my hands over the smooth surface. "And to give you a fresh start." I cried then, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness and the stark contrast between these friends who showed up and the family who had turned me away. These were tears of gratitude, though not despair, a distinction I was slowly learning to recognize. Rebuilding my graphic design business proved more challenging. Without my complete portfolio and many of my original files, I had to essentially start from scratch with some clients. Others had moved on during my illness, but the experience forced me to rethink my approach to work entirely. "Maybe this is an opportunity, not just a setback," suggested Tara, who had become a close friend after our shared hospital stay. We were having coffee at a cafe near my new apartment, enjoying the simple pleasure of being well enough to be out in public. "What would you design if you could start completely fresh?" Her question sparked something in me. I had always been good at creating what clients wanted, but perhaps now was the time to develop my own distinctive style and approach. I began experimenting with new techniques, taking online courses to expand my skills, and gradually building a portfolio that felt more authentically mine than anything I'd created before. I also became meticulous about backing up my work. Multiple external drives, cloud storage, even printed copies of my most important designs. Never again would I risk losing everything because someone else controlled access to my work. Physical recovery continued to be a slow process. The pneumonia had done significant damage to my lungs, leaving me with asthma-like symptoms that flared up with exertion or exposure to cold air. Twice weekly respiratory therapy sessions helped, but my pulmonologist warned it might be a year or more before I regained full lung function, if ever. The important thing is to be patient with yourself, he advised during a follow-up appointment. Your body has been through a major trauma. Recovery isn't linear. That wisdom applied to emotional healing as well. Some days I felt strong and forward-looking, proud of how I'd survived and fought back. Other days, the grief of being abandoned by my only family member would hit me unexpectedly, triggered by something as simple as seeing a mother and daughter shopping together or overhearing someone talk about going home for the holidays. On one particularly difficult day, I found myself sitting on my apartment floor surrounded by old photographs I'd managed to save from storage, pictures of my father holding me as a baby, rare images of my mother actually smiling, family vacations before everything fell apart. The loss felt overwhelming, not just of what had been, but of what should have been. The normal family relationship I would never have. I called Zoe, barely able to speak through tears. She arrived 20 minutes later with ice cream and a determination to help me process rather than avoid the pain. "Tell me about your dad," she said, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside me. "I've known you all these years and I realize I've never heard much about him." So I did. I told her about his laugh that seemed to fill any room, about how he taught me to fish. Even though I was squeamish about putting worms on hooks, about the way he always made time to listen to my childhood stories, no matter how tired he was after work. Sharing those memories hurt, but it also reminded me that I had been loved truly and deeply, even if it was too brief. Inspired by that conversation, I decided to start therapy. The hospital social worker had recommended it months earlier, but I had been focused on physical recovery and financial stability. Now I recognized that the psychological wounds needed attention too. Dr. Levine, a compassionate therapist specializing in trauma and family estrangement, helped me understand that my mother's treatment of me reflected her deficiencies, not mine. Some people simply lack the capacity for empathy and secure attachment, she explained. It's not that you were unlovable. It's that she was incapable of loving properly. Those sessions gave me tools to process the grief and anger without letting them define me. I learned to recognize when I was applying my mother's critical voice to myself and how to counter those thoughts with more balanced perspectives. Most importantly, I began to accept that while I couldn't change my family history, I could choose my family of choice going forward. That family continued to grow in unexpected ways. Tara introduced me to a patient advocacy group that worked with people facing medical crises without family support. At first, I just attended meetings, finding comfort in stories that echoed aspects of my own. Eventually, I began volunteering, using my design skills to create informational materials and my personal experience to help others navigate similar challenges. Through that group, I met people who became important parts of my new support network. Marisa, a retired nurse with boundless practical wisdom; Jordan, a law student focusing on healthcare advocacy; Eleanor, who had survived her own family abandonment during illness and now ran support groups. They showed me what healthy, supportive relationships looked like, each in their own way. As my health improved, I established a strict healthcare emergency fund setting, aside a percentage of every payment I received. I updated my legal documents, removing my mother as next of kin, and creating a medical power of attorney that named Zoe instead. These practical steps helped me feel more secure, less vulnerable to future crises. Almost exactly a year after the day my mother had thrown me out, I was grocery shopping when I saw her across the produce section. She was examining avocados, looking exactly the same as she always had. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, old panic rising in my chest. Then our eyes met, and I saw her recognition followed by visible discomfort. She hesitated, then took a step toward me, her expression shifting into a social mask I recognized all too well, the face she presented to neighbors and acquaintances when she wanted to appear normal and caring. "Alana," she said, her voice artificially bright, "you look well." I studied her, feeling strangely calm. "I am well," I replied simply. "Good, good." She glanced around as if hoping to see someone else join our awkward tableau. "I've been meaning to call you. Perhaps we could have lunch sometime, catch up." The old me would have jumped at this opening, desperate for any crumb of maternal attention. But I knew better now. There was no acknowledgement of what had happened, no apology, not even a hint that she recognized the magnitude of her betrayal. Just a casual suggestion of lunch, as if we were distant acquaintances who had drifted apart through benign neglect. "No," I said, the word surprisingly easy to say. "I don't think that would be good for me." Her smile faltered. "I see. Well, if you change your mind." "I won't," I said gently but firmly. "Take care of yourself, Diane." Using her first name, acknowledging that while she had given birth to me, she had not been a mother in any meaningful sense, felt like the final step in my journey to independence. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing among the avocados, my cart and my future moving in a different direction entirely. That night, sitting on the small balcony of my apartment watching the sunset, I reflected on how far I had come. My body was stronger, though I still kept an inhaler nearby for bad days. My business was growing again, with new clients who appreciated my evolved design aesthetic. My chosen family surrounded me with genuine care and support. The pain of rejection hadn't disappeared entirely. Perhaps it never would, but it no longer defined me. I had learned that true strength isn't never needing help. It's knowing you deserve help when you need it, and having the courage to seek it from those who are capable of giving it. Most importantly, I had discovered that sometimes fighting back isn't about winning a battle against others, but about refusing to accept the harmful narratives they try to impose on you. My mother had deemed me worthless, a burden, someone who might as well be dead. By choosing to live fully, to create boundaries, to build genuine connections, I had proven her wrong in the most profound way possible. If you're watching this and facing your own version of family betrayal or abandonment, please know you're not alone. Your worth isn't determined by those who fail to love you properly. Have you experienced something similar? Or know someone who has? Share your story in the comments below. Subscribe if you found this helpful, and remember that sometimes the family we create matters more than the family we're born into. Thank you for witnessing my journey. May your own path lead to the healing and peace you deserve.